Hey folks, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. All right, today on the show is Stuart Clayton. Stuart Clayton is a bass educator and a bass player, obviously, living in the UK. And he's got a company called Bassline Publishing that publishes a lot of instructional books and transcription books. We talk about his process getting into that and getting into the world of publishing bass materials and resources. We talk a lot about the nature of music education and how that relates to like the online thing versus people going to music schools and conservatories, and what's kind of the trajectory on that as far as the trajectory on music schools as a building, as a brick and mortar, still being kind of relevant in the future. I don't know. They're interesting ideas we kick around. I had a great time talking to him. I would like to still continue to bring up D. Lake and basses. If you're at the house and you got a bunch of free time, you would like a new bass, click on D. Lake and basses. You can get there from thebasshed.com. Send Dan an email. Tell him you're a friend of mine, Ryan Roberts, and he would love to have a conversation with you about the bass you're interested in, and he is happy to deliver that on custom specs. So Dan Lakin, D. Lakin Basses. That's all that. And here is my talk with Stuart Clayton. How you doing, man?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. What's it like over there in the UK right now? I haven't been really watching the world news about all this.
It's we're locked down like you guys are.
Yeah.
I went out today for the first time. I left the village that I live in for the first time in about 2 weeks today, which is kind of strange.
Just for like a little walk around the.
To
go the neighborhood.
Go and get some shopping.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's really quiet, and obviously there's a lot of people that are ill. Our Prime Minister's in intensive care at the moment, so.
Oh wow.
Yeah, wow. It's pretty serious.
It is. It's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Man, well, I'm glad you're safe and healthy.
Yeah.
I was on your website, man. I was checking out your website. You got a lot of publishing stuff going on. I know that's that's also the publishing name is Bassline Publishing, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. When did you get into doing all that, writing the instructional books?
It's kind of two things, really. When I was at university, in the late 90s or mid to late 90s, I'd done a lot of transcriptions of bass lines by Mark King from Level 42. I just happened to show it to my bass teacher one day, and he said, "Oh, this is fantastic. You should try and get it published."
Yeah.
So this was kind of like before the internet was really a big thing, Right. So I had to go. I bought this book called The Writer's Handbook and found all these music publishers. Wrote to them all and sent them all a sample, and they all wrote back and said thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, I've had the same. I approached some like major music publishers with some transcription book ideas and sent them samplers, and the same exact response, like, "Yep, thanks, but no thanks." All right.
Yeah, I mean, typically, as you probably know, like if guitar is this, bass is this,
right.
It's a tenth of it, so they're just, the publishers typically aren't interested. But there was one guy at music sales who was quite helpful, and he said, "Look, why don't you get the rights for the songs and publish it yourself, which I can help you do."
Okay.
So I did. It took about a year to get the licensing in place for it all. Excuse me.
Right.
It's a really time-consuming process, that whole licensing thing. And then I financed it all myself. I mean, I was only about 22 when I first did it, and it was a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But I just did this initial print run of 100 copies, and they just sold, like that.
Great.
It was cool. So I did that for a couple of years. I did another book after that, and then a friend of mine was starting up Bass Guitar magazine here in the UK.
Okay.
That magazine was started by someone that I know who owns a a music shop relatively locally. Anyway, he came to me and said, "Oh, do you want to work on this magazine?" And I did. And then through the magazine, a publisher got in touch, company called Sanctuary Publishing, and they said, "We've got some fairly successful guitar books. Do you have anyone on your staff that could write us a bass book?" And because I'd done these level 42 books, my editor said, "Yeah, talk to Stuart." And so I wound up writing 7 books for music sales in the early 2000s, and they were really successful for music sales, I believe.
Nice.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of the ones broken down by kind of level. Like I've seen that you have some intermediate, and then things that are just specifically on scales or specific techniques like slap bass and stuff like that.
No. The books that I wrote for Sanctuary are not on my website.
Okay.
Purely because they're mostly out of print now.
Okay.
So it was things like there was a book called Crash Course Bass, which was like a beginner book.
Yeah.
There was a really strange book called Bass Extreme, which I got really excited about when I heard the title, but it was actually written for kids.
Okay.
And then there was a book called Giants of Bass, which was, I think, the most successful one that I did for them. That was really, really popular, and I have since republished that under my own company.
Yeah, so then you have 2 volumes that are broken down by eras, what, 80s and 90s, 60s and 70s?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And now, how did you because like that's where I'm focused with my website, the Bass Shed. It's all transcription based. So it's like I just transcribe electric guys and upright guys and teach the transcriptions, and not only being able to play the transcription, but like digging into the concepts that are in the transcription. So if you hear somebody do whatever kind of thing, we're going to kind of get into that a little bit too, and almost like an isolated tangent lesson within the transcription.
Yeah.
But I'm finding that going through and only dealing with the bass legends, the guys like Pino or Chuck Rainey, these session dudes that have so much recorded, they're on so many tracks. How did you go about picking the tunes to transcribe? Because for me, that's like a week's, several week process.
For
like
the
listening
to
it. You mean? Yeah, for the Giants of Bass.
Well, those aren't actually transcriptions of the artist's music. Those are pieces that I composed.
Okay, in the style of
those artists.
Okay, I see. Yeah, then that takes all me being an idiot. That takes that part out of the equation, because I'm just like listening to, I think it's been like 3 weeks just going through a ton of Chuck Rainey records, the records that Rainey was on, looking for some stuff that I can really sink my teeth into, and that part of it is just really laborious. But that's cool, man. I like that. So, and then how did you approach that? Teaching the style of, let's say, I mean, I could actually pull up the book right here. I'm in front of my computer. But give me an example. Like who's someone you've taught in the style of in one of these books?
Well, you pick one. There's all the big names are in there, really.
Okay. So let's say Jamerson. So if you do a Jamerson thing, now how there's quintessential licks that he would always play.
Yeah.
And he had a very signature style. So would you just like kind of come up with a chord progression and play a Jamerson inspired line through it?
Yeah, so I had a chord sequence for that piece that was very Motown.
Yeah.
And I think I sat and just improvised through. And until I started to come up with things that I felt worked and reflected the Jamerson style, but you can't just pick up a bass and play along to a chord sequence and come out sounding like Jamerson, like I'm sort of
right. Yeah. Believe it or not, it's not that easy.
It's not that easy. In order to be able to do that, I'd transcribed a lot of Jamerson.
Sure. And to really get that in there, yeah.
And you make notes, mental notes. You think, okay, so he does the open string rake things. He plays a lot of Route 5 and octave,
Mm-hmm.
bass lines. He plays a lot of chromatics. He does a lot of this. He does a lot. You wind up with this kind of Jameson toolkit in your head of the sorts of things that he does. And so when I'm improvising a bass line, you come up with things you think, oh no, there's no way he'd do that. That doesn't seem like
Right.
a thing. Or oh yeah, that's totally a Jameson kind of a thing. And you just basically start taking the ones that feel right and like bolting it together.
Yeah.
So it's not an improvisation by the end. It's a very meticulous composition by the end of it,
Sure.
which Jameson wouldn't have done. He would have just improvised it. But
Right, but at the same time, like he was already familiar with his style.
yeah, he was familiar with his own
He
style.
didn't have to make notes about how he played,
No,
or any of those guys. Like that's just what they do. But I'm personally really fascinated with that, like the history of the bass and like really checking into guys' styles, because then you do hear more modern guys, like Pino, and you hear all of that in their playing. Like you hear Jaco Pastorius in his playing, you hear Jamerson in his playing, and so much of it, not just like, oh yeah, that's kind of a thing. That's like, oh wow, okay, you've done your homework, with all the guys up to you, and I think that's cool. I really get into that kind of lineage of the bass and the history of the instrument like that too.
yeah, and I mean, Pino's a very, very difficult bass player to emulate because he's done so many different things.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Yeah,
Like it's actually what I'm doing later today. Is is shooting the first video for the Pinot collection, and he's been a challenge to kind of put a collection of transcriptions together that can like fully not emulate, but represent the everything he's been on, because he's been on everything from Nine Inch Nails to Jay Dilla, Adele and Shearing, Paul Simon, like he's Tears for Fears, like so much stuff. It's like his playing is so fluid. He's always the right guy for every job. And like, how do you teach that? It's pretty crazy.
no, well, yeah, you don't.
Yeah. Exactly. That's true. Like you don't like you. Um, that's the magic of Pino Palladino, and a lot of other guys like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're going to teach Pino, you've got to zero in on a particular era. So one of the things that he was very, very famous for early on was obviously playing fretless bass through a
Yep.
Boss C2. And you can like go to that era of his playing, and then you can go to the next era. Where he's on flat wounds on a P bass, whatever it was. Doing that kind of the funk stuff, and then you got the John Mayer stuff. So I think you've got to take a player like that and look at it in periods.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. Like, when I was doing kind of the collection on Paul McCartney, like I was trying to, pick a pick a bass line from almost every record, not every record, but major records from the Beatles, and like check in on his playing per record and like take a look at how his playing had changed. Kind of is a natural progression throughout the Beatles.
And did you check out the stuff that he did with Wings as well and his solo stuff?
I mean, I have. It's not part of the transcriptions as of now, because there's so many dudes I'm trying to get out there, and dudes I'm trying to cover. Like any one of these guys is a deep, deep study. Just like you could do a whole thing on just McCartney. 20, 25 transcriptions deep.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, that's a lot of time. uh, that's a lot of time, and I'm also trying to do the upright guys too. So Ray Brown, Scott LaFaro, Ron Carter, and so I can't, like I think I'm gonna put a cap at like 5 on it for some of these guys. Like I think I did 5 McCartneys. I just put a cap on it. I'm like, all right, I got to move on just for the sake of there's other people I need to cover. If someone's interested in a specific line or something, like shoot me an email, I'll check it out and probably transcribe it. But then I can't be responsible for everything Paul McCartney played on. That's for teaching everything McCartney played on. Like that's just it's too much, and it's all cool. Like any of these guys, like yeah, it's great. That's why they're greats because they played great. So I'm sure there's going to be emails of like, oh man, you left this one out. Well, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I mean, I get emails all the time saying why wasn't Les Claypool in the
Sure.
It's not to say he won't be in the future, but
right, yeah, that's the thing. So like, I mean, I had to, and then there's stuff that people are listening to. Like, if I cover Flea, I can cover like a handful of Flea bass lines, but then I'm definitely gonna get an email about like why wasn't this one in there? I'm like, well, okay, well, it will be. It can be. Like the doors aren't locked. It's I just had to put some boundaries on it so I can move on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you you also do a lot of Skype lessons, and if so, how much of this how much of the history of this and like the learning from the Giants thing is a part of your lessons with one-on-one students of any level?
Not very much actually. I mean, I do a day of Skype lessons, and
Okay.
the majority of what I typically cover with my students is fretboard familiarity and reading music. That seems to be the thing that the students that I have come to me for. They want to know the fingerboard and they want to be able to read music, and so that's what I spend.
Wow, just wanting to be able to read. Like I usually have to like kind of talk them into it. Like but most of my students, like, they're not hungry to read music. They just want to deliver without kind of all the skills that take to deliver. They just want to show up and play. They just play all the impressive stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, but like if you think of it as an iceberg, like you only see the tip. Like that thing goes miles and miles deep. Like you got to learn that too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I typically treat students in a couple of different ways. I mean, you get the ones that want to learn the reading and want to do the theory-based things, and I take them on a certain route. And then those that come to me and they just want to learn some songs to play in the pub with their friends and jam blues and things like that. Slightly different approach with them. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but the guys that just want to play Scorpion songs with their friends, if you try and get them to read music, you're never going to see them again.
No, right. They're not going to last long as students either. They're like, they're not getting what they want out of it, and it's a challenge for the teacher as well.
And I think one of the biggest problems that we have in bass education is we don't really cater for the hobbyist too much.
Right.
We worry so much about are we playing enough bebop scales, or are we doing are we studying enough Carol Kay and Jameson? And sometimes guys just want to learn their favorite songs, and they just want to go to an accomplished player that can teach them their favorite song well.
Sure.
And that's what they want, and I think that's something that we should make available to people as well.
I do. I absolutely agree. I think one of the best ways it was ever told to me, like this was someone's approach when I first got to LA. I had hit up a bass player about getting some lessons from him, and his approach was like, man, it's a big room, it's a big world, there's room for everybody, like whatever keeps you excited about playing the bass, that's what we'll go through. So there was no predisposed curriculum of like, let me find out where you're at, and then I'm gonna check in with my curriculum and we'll just pick up there. It was he was really, I love that about him. I've been able to kind of reconnect with him years later. We were all just like in a friend's barbecue or something, and I got to tell him that like that made a big impression on me and really shaped my head as a teacher too. Like, yeah, man, that's cool. Just really making sure people stay excited about the instrument, because that's what it is. Things geeking out on a Jamerson line, or whatever, Paul Chambers solo or something, like that gets me excited. But like that's probably not for the masses.
Not for everyone, for sure.
No, like someone might be cool just being able to play Mustang Sally with their buddies in a garage, and that's totally cool. And I like that approach, and I agree with you. Like whatever it is, for the hobbyists too. That just keeps them excited and playing music, because music. I feel like everybody has a different relationship to music.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You know, and whatever that relationship is to them, like keep it thriving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What kind of resources do you have? Like, I know you have a bunch of books for different levels. What kind of things do those cover that don't get too theory based? Because theory, I think it takes a specific person to really want to be interested, take the leap from like playing with their buddies into like, understanding, the difference between a Dorian scale and an Aeolian scale. Like, that's when it becomes more theoretical, like you can lose some people. Is there a way you really kind of approach that as a teacher to where it's not as daunting as it sounds?
Well, I've been teaching for about 20 years, and I've just done the last 12 years as head of bass in a big school here in the UK. So, um, without wanting to sound too modest, I'm a pretty good teacher. So,
Sure.
when someone says they want to know how to do something, because I've had so much experience of teaching,
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at breaking it down in a way that makes it easier for them to digest, and cutting away some of the things that they don't necessarily need, and
Right.
helping them cut to the nub of the matter sometimes, if you see what I mean. So I think the
Right.
strength that I have, the strength that I have with teaching is that I'm able to explain things in a clear way.
Yeah.
That's I think that's how I get across. Sometimes, as you say, theory concepts can be quite intense
Hmm.
for players who've not encountered that kind of stuff before. But I've had a lot of success in the past with being able to break that stuff down into bite-sized chunks for people to work on, at a slower level, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Now I'm 38, and we probably came up in a similar area where I was really, when I started playing, like, the internet wasn't a big thing. All these resources that are out there now, weren't out there. I remember talking on a podcast um, to another bass player that hosts a podcast, and I'm like, man, I kind of wonder. It's funny to think about, like, if I would have been checking into these resources as uh, you know, a beginner player or not. And so how have you seen all these resources affect students that are coming in to the schools and your students that you're teaching?
Well, as you said, you and I grew up in pre-internet worlds, and
Yeah.
I tend to think that although on the face of it, there's an amazing amount of resource available to people these days, um, I think that's a bad thing,
Hmm.
for the most part, because when I was learning how to play, if I wanted to learn something like a Mark King line or a Jameson line or something like that, I had to figure it out myself.
Yes.
And there's so much value to figuring something out for yourself that I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. And although
Hmm.
I sell transcription books as part of my living,
Sure.
uh, I always encourage bass students to do the work themselves, because you can learn a certain amount. You get two levels of learning: surface level learning and deeper level learning. And
Yeah.
if someone just gives you a transcription, you just look at it and go, oh right, yeah, okay, and then you can play it within a X amount of time, whatever it is. But there was no real challenge there. Whereas if you figure it out yourself, you get it wrong, and over
Hmm.
time someone shows you another bit, and you go, right, so that must be like that, and you gradually put the jigsaw together of figuring it out for
Sure.
yourself. It's such a deep learning experience. So,
No, it's very, yeah, I 100% agree.
but
Yes.
it's the problem that we have these days is that whatever you want to learn, there's a resource out there for it. So, and it's not always an accurate resource either, but you can go and find something that will do that for you. And I find that with a lot of the students that I used to teach in the schools, they would come in and they'd just been kind of bowled over, if you like, by the amount of information that's out there on. It's mostly YouTube is the
Sure.
place that people go for, but there's hundreds and probably thousands of bass educators now on YouTube, sort of saying,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
this is how you do this is how you do that. And it's an onslaught of information, and it can be extremely difficult for a young musician to just cut through it
Hmm.
and find and find one singular voice, one person that resonates with
Sure.
them, that they can just take on as their teacher. So I think that there's too much information out there now. Like I said, on the face of it, it's a great thing, and it probably is for the most part, but it can be incredibly overwhelming for a young student.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Actually, I think it's if you can, if someone can stumble upon something that they really connect with and it's working for them and where they want to go and where they're at, then it's great. But the amount of, you're right, the amount of information that's out there, it's worse than, like, I want to watch a movie. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, like, where do I go? Like, what, and then you spend 45 minutes hunting for a movie, and it's like, well, all right, that's enough of that. That's really the time I was going to be watching a movie, and now I still haven't even started one.
Yeah.
And I feel like, finding information about a bass education or music education is similar. If someone can find somebody that they lock in with, then that's great, Um, other than that, like, I have no idea I don't have any thoughts on fixing that problem. About streamlining the resources. Um, who knows? Who knows? Hopefully, people are finding what they.
I mean, there's no solution to it.
No, there's not.
Only thing that needs to be really reinforced to young players is the value of doing a lot of the work yourself. Doing your own transcription work and finding enjoyment in it. And I sometimes think if you don't enjoy that process of figuring something out, learning a Miles Davis, walking bass line or something, or you have to ask yourself why you're doing it sometimes if you don't enjoy the process of learning.
Right, and it's a tedious process. It's a
Yeah.
very tedious process. I remember my first transcriptions, and one of them was just a melody on a song. Like, I transcribed a tune to bring into, my jazz combo in college or something. And it's a relatively simple tune. It was a song by John Patitucci. So I transcribed just the melody and the chords. But that took me forever. And it was, it wasn't challenging for the nature of what that song was. But it took me forever. And, you have to go back and you have to proofread them. And, is there any mistakes in here? Oh, wow. Yeah, there's a lot of mistakes. But it really tunes your ears. It tunes your concept of rhythm. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. The value of transcribing. But yes, I think that's the way to do it. That's really, it's kind of the approach I've taken with the bass shed, is point everybody back to records, and that's where it's all at. So if someone does find because we were talking about it, Paul McCartney line, cool, yeah, you can email me and maybe I'll add it to the collection, or do it yourself. Like, I don't want to be a dick, but you don't need me for that, and you'll get more value out of it. If someone were to come to me, I think about this a lot. If a student were to come to me and tell me about my website, but the website wasn't mine, they're just going to tell me about it. I'm like, cool, that's a good resource, but also transcribe it yourself. Like, that's what I would say about my own website. I think it's a cool thing. You can get some stuff together. Maybe it'll forward someone's technique a little bit, or raise awareness of bassline construction, or something like that. But I think about that a lot, and I don't know. Maybe I'm an advocate of tough love or something. But my thing as a teacher would be like, cool, yeah, that's great. There's a lot of cool stuff on there, and there's websites I've checked out in the past that have had a bunch of transcriptions on, and I found value in that, of playing through some things that I thought were interesting, but not interesting enough for me to transcribe.
Yeah.
So there's that. Like, yeah, cool, I'll learn these, Michelle and Digicello grooves or something, but I'm not so interested that I'm going to transcribe it. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny, the the nature of all of it. I don't know. I feel like I'm talking in circles right now. Anyways, what's your so in addition to spending a lot of time as an educator, what's your performance schedule like? Obviously not right now, but in general, do you still have time to perform, and is that part of how you're making a living, or is it you've kind of focused more on the education
Well, these
side
these
of things?
these days I'm totally focused on education. I did
Mhm.
back in 2006 through 2010. I played bass for Carl Palmer, the
Okay.
drummer from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and we did 4 years of touring with him. We went around the States, all went around Europe a lot. So I've done kind of as much of all that kind of thing as I would want to do. Um,
Yeah.
by which I mean I've experienced it and it was fun. But
Sure.
it did make me realise that my passion for music really lies in education and in teaching and writing books. So for the most part, that's what I do. But I do still play, in a covers band, a wedding band,
Okay.
doing weekend things and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of enough for me really, because as I said, my main passion really is writing books and video lessons and things like that.
That's great, man. I like a lot when people figure out, whether through a process of you have toured and realize like, okay, I'm good with that. Now
Yeah.
I want to focus on this, but really just kind of finding what really works for them within music, because it's not. I've been asked a lot. Um, I have a lot of friends on a lot of major tours, and I've been asked like, well, how come you never got on one? And I'm not that I would say no to a tour if it seemed interesting to me and all that. But it's not something I'm really interested in chasing. Like I know that that's for a lot of people. Like that's a dream, is to go do all this and that. But
Yeah.
for some reason, like that doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've found in being a teacher was having that viewpoint had enabled a lot of students to think, oh, hang on a minute, yeah, I mean, I want to be a musician, but I don't necessarily want to I don't want to be on stage.
Right.
A lot of people felt, and I've known students that have sort of come to the realization that they love music, but what they want to do is they want to go into something like music therapy, or they want to go into
Yeah.
licensing or event planning or something like that. They want to be attached to the industry, but they don't want the thing they initially thought they want, which was the touring and recording, or the lifestyle that they thought they wanted. That wasn't actually what was for them in the end.
Right. Right. And there's
Sometimes just having a teacher sort of say that and say that there's lots of different things that you can do within music without it being that one thing that everyone thinks they want to do. I think that can be quite helpful.
No, I think it's pretty. I think it's pretty empowering to, as a teacher, um, not only be able to tell that to your students because you've experienced it and you've come to terms with all that in your own life, but it's empowering for the student to realize like, oh, okay, I don't have to be that guy, this figure within the bass world to that, like, that doesn't mean I'm good, or that doesn't mean this, or that doesn't mean that. It's really just about everybody finding their place in the world that works for them, where they can reach people through music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's great. And I also think that within my own coming to terms with a lot of those ideas, um, if I'm not on a major tour, that doesn't diminish my skill set.
No.
Just but like that in my like mid-20s, like that was a big thing I really had to come to terms with. It's like, well, man, if I'm like, hey guys, like, yeah, I'm not on a tour, but I can still play.
Well, there are always more musicians than there are tours.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. But like I had a lot of, I personally had a lot wrapped up in the gig, whatever the gig was.
Yeah.
You know, accrediting me or not, validating, I guess is a better word.
Yeah.
So like I was only, like I was as good as the people I was playing with, and that's it. Like if I was playing in some like whatever, throw together bar band for, you know, gas money that night, like, I would take it personally and just be like, oh man, what the hell's going on in my career? What I'm better than, you know. And as soon as I know for me, like, kind of got out of that kind of thinking, everything was so much better personally and even musically. Like, okay, you don't have to prove anything. Just show up, play, you know, make the best musical decisions you can make within this. Have some fun. Be nice to the people you're playing with. You know, have a good time. Leave everybody with a good experience all around, and everything will be all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I definitely, and there was a couple key people even in my life that really, that had said things like that. Like, musicians I looked up to were just like, no, touring's not for me. Oh, wow. So it's okay that I'm not interested in it either. That's amazing. Those things are great to hear, and I'm glad that that's you instilled that into students. I think that's great, because there's so many facets within music.
Oh yeah.
That, you know, where as long as someone finds their thing, and however the bass plays into that, it's amazing. I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on this, from being an educator and having an online presence and all those things. Interested to hear your thoughts on what maybe some advice, I guess would be a good word, that you could tell people now, because that's, then I'm sure, like you, I'm sure like me, you see a bunch of people, everybody's offering lessons online now. So yeah, well, how would you speak to people that are trying to get into cultivating an online presence? And maybe they're going to stick with it, you know, after things settle down with our current situation. Obviously, nobody knows what that's going to be like.
I think it's a very difficult thing to get into these days, just purely because of the numbers of people that are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly difficult to kind of cut through the, just the level of noise, because I think if you'd done this 10 years ago, if someone was to set up 10 years ago, they'd have found a very empty marketplace, and they would have
Sure.
quite a comfortable home. But these days, there's you got sort of 10 or 12 really big name educators in bass now, so it's kind of hard to go against all that kind of thing. But I think the thing is, if you can think about your reputation first of all, if you can build a reputation for yourself as a great player and someone that people want to learn from, that's the thing that's got to come first. I mean, I'm always suspicious of people that leave music school and then immediately become teachers, because you've got to go and have some experience first. You got to put all the things that you've learned to practice in the real world in order to then be able to teach it in an effective way. So I guess you've just got to make it clear that you've got something to offer that is not unique, but that maybe you can offer in a different way, or a better way, maybe.
Sure.
It's a very tough question, Ryan. I've got to be honest.
No, yeah, I know, because it's I had to sort it out for myself when I started getting into this, a few years ago, and a few years ago was when I started building the website for it, and it's still just kind of an idea in the back of my mind. There was nothing out publicly yet, but I'm like sifting through ideas about, like, well, one, what am I interested in teaching first and foremost? Two, there's exactly what you said, which was, how do I break through all the other stuff that's out there? At the end of the day, I don't want to say there's only so much as if there's limitations on music, because there's not. But when it comes to education, like, okay, well, one, I'm not interested in talking about scales, fingerboard awareness, or things like that. I'll talk about them like in a transcription video about, like, well, here's the best way to finger this, whatever triplet that Ray Brown did or something. But other than that, like, I'm not passionate about that. And also, if I were, there's millions of other people out there already talking about it, and a lot of books out there and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, well, that just seems like a tough road to hoe.
Yeah, I guess you got to teach from the thing that you you're most passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah, and and that's obviously different for everybody. Like having a well-rounded. It seems like you're really delivering and presenting students with a well-rounded approach to a lot of things that go into playing the electric bass.
Yeah, I mean,
That's great. Like that's a complete comprehensive, like, from like, hey, this is your first bass, all the way into like some, a higher, more advanced techniques. Like they can go all the way through that process. That's awesome.
I think one of the things that I've done that benefited me really was teaching in the music school that I worked in for 12 years, which was, I had to teach, like a, through the ages kind of, styles kind of course.
Yeah.
Starting with, the early jazz and blues all the way through to muse and, current stuff. So, I'm really quite well versed in the history of the instrument and the heritage of all the different players that have come before. And of course, in being able to teach all that kind of stuff, you have to know about all the various different techniques and the theory that goes behind it. So, I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I've had for the last 12 years to teach to the level that I have done, because it's made me a better rounded player just through having to know so much about the instrument. So yeah, I mean, I do tend to teach kind of all things really. I mean, I've got my passions, as you suggested earlier on, the things that I really enjoy. But it's not often that I teach that, to be quite honest with you. It's more often that I'm teaching things like scales and reading, as I said earlier. I'd love to sit here all day and teach people how to play Mark King and flea riffs, but there's a million YouTube videos for that kind of stuff now. And that sort of thing is mostly, you can learn that from YouTube. But whereas, understanding music and understanding how a scale works and what you can do with it and what it's going to lead you into, you need a live human being that you can relate to. To kind of get that across. And that's where I find that I come in a lot of the time with teaching.
Now, with the online thing that's so prevalent, how has that impacted attendance at school? Like if there's so many resources, not if there just are, there's no if in that statement. There are so many resources, maybe too many, about bass education and music education. How's the school? How's the actual brick and mortar school doing? Is enrollment down because they don't necessarily need to be paying tuition to something that they can find online, or are there less music majors coming through?
Well, first of all, I don't work at the school anymore. I finished there last year, but in the last 3 years that I was there, yes, attendance, admissions were down quite a bit, and attendance was appalling. It was just dreadful because there's lots of different reasons there, and I think one of the main ones is that you can find the information that you want online. If you don't want to get up and go to a class, you can figure it out anyway. But like I said, lots of different reasons for lack of attendance or lack of admissions and things like that. But I do wonder a lot of the time whether the days of the brick and mortar school, are numbered really, particularly with what's going on now with the coronavirus thing. Because if we wind up being locked down, they're talking about maybe 6 months over here, worst case scenario, and that takes us all the way through the third term of college into the summer, and then potentially into the how are music colleges going to enroll new students? We can't not going to be able to do open days. They're not going to be able to. They're going to find it very, very difficult to enroll new students. And then
and with that kind of instability with the scheduling, like how are they going to know when to get their audition tapes in by? And all that stuff.
I think this is going to have a big effect on education, but I think maybe this is going to hasten something that was just happening slowly anyway, which is that education is changing massively because of the internet, because of things like YouTube and the prevalence of really good online music curriculums now that you don't have to spend many thousands going into debt to use. And so I do wonder whether the bricks and mortar thing is going to be around in 20 years time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. And I was doing a gig with a professor friend of mine, teaches at a college here in LA, and we were talking about that on the break one time. And because it's fascinating to me, the more time I spend putting into, I guess a bass education website, like I'm thinking about like, well, like how is this affecting the school? Because I know that I didn't get this kind of detailed information that I'm presenting when I was in music school. And not to say that my teacher was bad or anything, but there's requirements we had to hit and whatever to be able to graduate. Which I never did, not because of the requirements, just because I wasn't. Back then, like I was already working professionally at like 19 or something, so I'm like, forget school. That was whatever. That was a life decision I made. But I was talking to this guitar player professor about it, and he's like, man, I think that there's a community that still happens at school. Like when you're at the music school, that's really important. And and I'm like, yeah, you know what, man, you're right. I wasn't thinking about that aspect of it, and I think you're right, because when I reflect back on my time at a music school, like I loved that community. Being able to just, maybe one of our professors had just dropped some stuff on us that we had never heard before, or we were in like an advanced theory class, and now all of a sudden we're talking about serial music and like trying to just talking with your peers about it. And it was a really cool exchange of ideas about music, and really we're all kind of figuring out where our place in it is. But that was a fantastic atmosphere, and for those reasons, I hope that there's still, whatever happens with the brick and mortar versus the web-based things, I hope that there's still ways that those characteristics of music education can stick around.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one of the biggest things that people do get out of going to a music school is not so much the education, although obviously that can be hugely important as well if it's delivered well, but the experience of being there with like-minded people and the environment. As you say, that's an incredibly important thing. And just to clarify what I said earlier, I mean, I'm not hoping for the bricks.
Right.
Right. I don't think that should happen, but I do worry that sure. Whether the financial kind of environment is going to exist in the future for that to be a possibility anymore. Based on the enormous overheads of running a building like that, whereas the obvious benefit of being able to run something from across the internet.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, there's a lot of not only the musical backlash or what it'll happen to musicians, but I mean, there's economical things when now musicians can't get jobs at schools. Like, that's going to be impactful to the whole nature of being a musician.
Yeah.
And it's a crazy time to be a musician. Actually, maybe it's always been a crazy time to be a musician. This is just my only experience with it.
Oh, it is, and as you go along through, I mean, if you think about the last 15 years, the rise of the internet has cut off so many different opportunities, if you like, for musicians.
Yeah.
And I used to sit around really worrying about that and worrying about where the next generation were going to get their gigs and money making opportunities from. And in the last 5 years, I began to worry a little bit less, because I realized that a lot of young people were coming up with things that I would personally never have thought of, because I'm not in that age bracket. But so it's that whole thing of necessity being the mother of invention. I mean, things like Patreon and all this, the whole crowdsourcing idea. That's just one small part of something that's grown in a way that I would never have expected.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that that's a cool way to look at it, which is there is a younger generation which is responding to modern culture differently than I am.
Yeah.
I still 15, 20 years ago is still kind of embedded in my mind a little bit. I mean, not to the same degree it was back then, but there's still like, to use the term very loosely, an older world mindset there about being a musician and making a living as a musician and all that stuff. Times have clearly changed, and within the last, I think your timestamp was pretty accurate. Like within the last 5 years, like, okay, that's definitely noticeable. I mean, I remember when I first moved to LA, like being hired as a session player was, I was getting a lot of calls like that. And then maybe that was 06, maybe like around 09, 2010, like because recording technology had picked up so fast.
Yeah.
And everybody could, do it themselves. And well, like then all of a sudden I wasn't getting the same amount of calls to play on things anymore. And it's interesting. So it's funny to me. I mean, if I think back about my time in Los Angeles specifically, it's always just like, all right, you go down that road till like something happens technology wise, and you're like, okay, well now you take a couple steps to the left, and you're like, all right, well now I'm safe right here for a little bit. Something else will happen, and so I'm always just adjusting to it.
Yeah, but in the same way as people would have sort of in their teens sort of thought, oh, I want to be a session musician, when I'm older. That isn't such a thing these days, but you get a lot of young guys that think, I want to be a YouTuber when I'm older. And as insane as it might seem to me, that's a job these days. People make money out of that, really good money.
Yeah. It's a viable option as a musician these days. And it's it's just funny. But to circle back, I do think that this younger generation responding to our current times will come up with some things, that I'll probably end up, coming back around to, like, oh, all right, yeah, good idea, kids. Let me hop on that bandwagon. It's all really fascinating to me. It's all really fascinating to me.
It's a fast changing world, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know. Obviously, being a musician, I'm trying to stay aware of all the things that are changing within this world, within the musical world and all that. But, I'm sure it's like this for everybody else in other occupations. It's crazy. It's just a little crazy. I guess that's all. And, add to it the coronavirus and all this current situation. Like that opens things up to a whole other situation about what life will be like in a few months. I can't even say after this. I don't know if there's an after. There's just an in lieu of. I don't know. It's not like the coronavirus is going to stop. No,
it's I don't even know what after this looks like at the moment.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody does, which puts our globe in the situation it's in.
Yeah, it's crazy. Absolutely.
Yeah,
but I don't know about crazy. You. I'm doing more practice than I've ever done in my life, I think. So.
Yeah, I mean that's a benefit, right? Like we're all going running and practicing. We're all going to be in shape and just be able to crush the bass. That's fantastic. What are you working on right now? Like what do you work on in your own practice time?
In my practice time, I just signed up on one of Jeff Berlin's courses.
Okay.
Because I really like Jeff's playing and the way he thinks about music, and so I'm working through some exercises that I got from that they're interesting because initially I thought, oh well, that's quite simple, and then once you dig in, you think, hang on, this is really highlighting something that I'm not as good at as I thought I was. So I'm kind of working on that stuff. I'm typically using that as a warm up. So maybe half an hour on that, and then I'm writing a book at the moment called Bass Monsters. Which has transcriptions of people like Victor Wooten, Michael Manring, Billy Sheehan, some really nasty
Oh,
piece.
some really solo bass
Yes,
kind of driven
it's
artists.
So, and one of the things that I want to, I mean, the book's pretty much written, but one of the things that I want to do is make sure that I can play all of the pieces and
Sure.
to a standard where I can do a video of them. So I'm working on some of those pieces in terms of being able to perform them at the moment. So that's kind of the kind of thing that I'm working on. But I'm really excited about the book because it took me about a year to get all the licensing in place for the music that I wanted to include in it, and it was a more pleasurable experience, well, not pleasurable experience, but an easier experience than it often is, securing permissions and things.
Oh, great.
So yeah, I'm just excited for the book to come out. It was going to come out in September, but it kind of depends where we go with the virus, and it might be next year.
Sure. I do think that's kind of my favorite part about. And then not only do I like the little discoveries that happen when you transcribe a piece and you sit down and I transcribed Sting's Englishman in New York. The bridge, there's a solo section where he's playing a walking line.
Yeah.
I would have never thought that Sting was doing like harmonic substitutions in a walking line until I transcribed him.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, okay.
But Sting,
like all those
one of those bass players where he's regarded as being, it's that guy from the Police. So he writes pop songs, but
right.
he really knows his stuff. He really knows.
Man, like it's. I didn't, and I remember saying it on the video. Like, there's no reason I shouldn't think that Sting is coming with that level of intellect into a walking bass line.
Yeah.
But I don't think of Sting as that guy.
No, because
I
think Sting's just a pop musician.
Right, exactly. And I put all that in the video and kind of apologized about how I thought about Sting. But I like those little nuggets that you discover in a transcription because there's almost one little gem in kind of all of them. Like, oh wow. There's that, and then the what you were talking about is being able to play it all. So I transcribed a bunch of Jamerson. It's like, okay, cool. Now I have to be able to play all this.
Yeah, because playing it's the last stage in the transcription.
It's the very last stage. Yeah, I mean that's
once you can play it through. I mean, I sat here at the beginning of the year with a transcription of a tune, and I played it till I could play it perfectly. But I even when I had the transcription, what I thought was absolutely perfect, I was still going back and making changes later on because you play something, you think there's no way that fingering works to get to that. You've got to change that to you make all these tiny little adjustments. So I think it's incredibly important that when you do a transcription, you're able to play it up to tempo. As per the original, if you possibly can. Some things it's impossible, but if you can do it, then I think that helps you put the final bit of icing on the cake of the transcription, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I agree, and specifically with the articulations. A big little tagline I use in my videos is like, it's not bass karaoke. Like, it's not just being able to, okay, these are the notes and this is the overall idea of the bass line. It's really working it out with the record and sounding like whoever the guy is with just a metronome. Go. If this thing's recorded at 98, put on your click at 98 and go sound like the record with just the metronome and be able to generate it, because being able to generate the line is a completely different thing than playing along to a line. So just learn the transcription, shut it with the record, and then own it with just the metronome. That's the cherry on top for me, because that means you're generating these feels where he pushes that little bit or pulls back on those notes or does that slur that way. Now you can generate it, and now it's part of you, and now that's the value of playing bass transcriptions to me.
I mean, there's nothing better than playing through a Jamerson line, with the metronome just clicking on 2 and 4 or something.
Right.
But getting that, when it feels good and it feels amazing, you can't help but grin. That's kind of.
Yeah, exactly. You know when you're there. Especially after you play through a line. Go ahead.
I said you can't write that down. That feeling, you just.
No. No, you can't. There's no little notes you can make over measure 67 about that.
No.
It's just that's the value of and I think, personally, people personally doing the transcriptions that's where it's really at. That's where it's really, really at. And I hope now that people will dig into that level of education with all this newfound free time we have. Because that's really the best.
The best thing that you can do with the time, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that obviously take physical care of yourself as well. But yeah, those things are. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So to any listeners to this podcast, do it yourself. Like that's.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Put YouTube down and do it yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my thing about that. So, who else is in that book that the monsters are based? You got Billy Sheehan.
Let me give
Manring.
you a list.
And now with Manring, like he's using the EBO and he's got a lot of effects. Do you talk about his signal chain?
Do you know what? Let me just get the book in front of me. So with Manring, the piece that I'm doing, it's called "I Left America," which is played on a fretless 5-string bass with an altered tuning.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the signal chain is going to have some bearing on it, but essentially, it's not got all the things going on it, that he often has in his music. Because, there's, for example, that I love pieces like, Celine and Monkey Businessman and things like that by Manring, but there's not really any point in doing a transcription or something like that because it requires the user to have that Zon hyperbass to play it because it's the only instrument on which you can perform that music. Right. So I went with this tune, "I Left America," which I love anyway, but it is, it does require a different tuning, but it stays in that one tuning all the way through. So
okay.
So yeah, it's that's the thing. But the list of people in it, we've got Billy Sheehan, James Jamerson, Carol Kay, Rocco Prestia, Victor Wooten, Mark King, Larry Graham, Lewis Johnson, Nathan Watts, Anthony Jackson, John Myung, Stu Ham, Jeff Berlin, Elaine Caron, Michael Manring, and Stanley Clark.
Okay, those are the dudes.
Those are the dudes
and ladies.
The cool stuff.
I don't want to leave Carol out of that.
Absolutely, yeah. Carol's fantastic, lad.
She is. Carol's. I've been going through. Like I create all these playlists for myself. And then I'll pull up their discography and some people like Carol because of the time it's not necessarily always Carol's pretty much cited on all the records from what I have, but then there's discrepancy of whether it was her or Jamerson on some of them, which then I would go back and like really listen to and come to terms with that myself. That's all I'm going to say about that in kind of a public platform.
I had the opportunity of interviewing Carol a few years ago.
Oh, man, amazing.
It was great. I'd written a book on plectrum technique, and she was very kind enough to talk to me over Skype. We talked for a couple of hours, and there was a couple of pieces that she mentioned, one of which was Bernadette. There's all the controversy about whether she played it or whether Jameson played it. And to be honest, I always thought it was Jameson, really.
Me too.
in that interview that I had with her, she talked about it with such detail and passion, and she talked about fills in such, I don't know, she just talked about having conceived them and the level of detail that she went into with it. I came away thinking, do you know what, I think it could have been her. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it could have been her, and then Jameson was asked to replicate it, or someone had written it out and he had to replay it for some reason, or vice versa, and it might be lost in the mist of time, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that that's that conversation is a little about that tune specifically. A little bit of that's the one I was thinking about when I was just talking about all that.
Yeah.
It is in my James Jamerson collection, and there's this thing that Jamerson did about how he would evolve a bass line that I thought was so kind of inside, and so I would love to have had the chance to talk to him about like, dude, did you know you were doing that, or is this just kind of what came out on so many of your tracks? Which was
it would have
he'll
been
play an opening.
sure of it.
Yeah, yeah. But he's gonna set up an idea in the second bar of a phrase that he's gonna go back to use at like let's say verse 1. This I'm not talking about specifically Bernadette now. I'm just talking about Jameson's.
It's a
thing.
concept, yeah.
Yeah, like he'll play it in like the second bar of verse 1, but then when it comes to verse 2, that becomes measure 1, that rhythmic thing, or those note choices or something. But what he plays in the second bar will always kind of be like where he goes back to elaborate the bass line. And then that's such a strong characteristic in his bass line construction. And when I saw some of those things happen in Bernadette, I'm like, that's Jamerson. I got to sign off on Jamerson. Now, he might have replicated the line. I had not known of her being in Detroit, and by the time Motown Records moved out here, Bernadette was already released.
Yeah.
So timeline, I couldn't figure it out either. But I spent like a whole night. I mean, like a whole night, like 6 hours, like really listening to the tracks, going back, like checking out when the tune was released, when Motown Records moved out here, like, kind of being an investigator on it. Well, because I didn't want to add it to the course and then get an email and be like, oh man, that was Carol K. I had to address it myself.
There's people that have spent years researching that kind of stuff and not really, nailed it.
Right.
I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know really with things like that. But,
either way, it's a fantastic bass line worth learning.
Great line, great play.
Yeah, but whichever one, it's a fantastic line. There's something else I was going to say in relation to her. Is she still around? I heard she moved back to the Midwest or something. Like, yeah. I knew she was living in Palm Springs for a little while.
Oh, I don't know where she lives, but she's still around. I think it was her birthday the other day. I saw it somewhere.
Oh, wow. I've been meaning to email her to ask her if she wanted to do the podcast, because it's really cool living in Los Angeles where so much of music from that era in the 60s and all that stuff was cut, and you can you hear them talk about it. You watch the Wrecking Crew thing on Netflix. It's like, oh yeah, that's it's right over there.
Yeah.
Or that's where the studio used to be that they cut this, or where they cut Pet Sounds. It was like now called East West. Like, oh cool, I just did a session there, and it's really cool to kind of be in the same city as all that.
Oh,
and obviously Carol was a driving force. So many of those records.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. Cool, man. Thanks for chatting.
Oh no, my pleasure. Very enjoyable.
Yeah. Keep me posted on what's happening with the book. I'll shoot out links and.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'll be going on about it on Facebook nearer the time. It's
okay.
Do you know what? One final thing I'll say about it was the title was purely provisional. I just came up with this name one day just to have an excuse of putting a load of really complicated pieces into a book. And I call it Face Monsters. And then someone found me a photograph of it's Billy Sheehan pulling a face on stage, and it's just the perfect photo for that type.
Now I want to see the photo.
The cover. You go on my Facebook page. If you scroll back a year or two, you'll find it. It's such a great book cover, and it just looks great. So the title was provisional, but it's wound up staying because the image that I found fitted so well.
Nice. That really locked it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's cool, man. I like when that stuff kind of works out. Like,
yeah, that really came.
This whole thing's called the Bass Shed because I was getting dinner with my brother one night, and we were talking about like, man, I think I'm gonna start doing a website thing with just transcriptions, and I was talking through a lot about ideas about, I'm like, the whole thing is about practicing, not always necessarily what to practice, but like really getting in and working it out yourself, and like really, really just shedding it.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh well, okay. Like I kind of heard myself say it, and I'm like, well, all right, that's what that is.
Yeah, well, the best names happen really quickly. I mean, the Bassline Publishing was literally the first thing that I thought of when I came. What do I do? I published Bassline.
Done and done.
Now,
how many books you got? It's an extensive thing. You got. We got like 6-7 books out.
Oh no, it's like 20.
20. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, some of those are transcription books.
Yeah.
but I've got maybe 10. I've got 3 or 4 technique books, and then 5 or 6 reading and theory sort of based things. Yeah, so 20 or so in my personal catalogue at the moment, and
Nice.
ideas for plenty more.
What I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I'm curious, but I'm not going to ask you. You know, we'll wait. We'll wait till those hit the marketplace. What were some books? What were some books that were useful to you coming up?
Oh, there was a Chuck Rainey book. You know, I forget what it's called, The Complete Electric Bass Player or something.
Okay.
There were 5 different volumes of it, and I had the big one, which I think is volume 3, which is the big yellow one. That was really good because there was no tab in that, so that made me read. That was good. Standing in the Shadows of Motown is amazing as well.
Sure.
Loved that. And there was a book that came out in the early 90s. It was called the Stuart Ham Bass Book.
Okay.
Transcriptions of Stuart Ham's music by him
Nice.
and John Liebman, who's a great bass player.
Yeah.
So it was all accurate. And I think the print run of this book was so small, and I was just so grateful that I found a copy. But it sort of set a template for the way I do books, because they wrote some detailed performance notes for each piece in the book, and I always try and do the same thing with mine now.
Yeah. I mean, that was going to be another question about how did those books influence you. I remember one of my former teachers who passed away. His name's Joel DeBartolo. Joel wrote this book called Serious Electric Bass.
I know, yeah.
And it was, I think it had like a picture of the modulus on the cover with like a wave on the fretboard, something. Very, very decorative bass that was on the thing. And I remember when I started studying with Joel, like I got to the first lesson, I'm like, dude, I have your book. You know, like I've been checking it out for a few years, like good stuff. And it was so comprehensive. And I remember thinking, even in the relation of like doing this thing and releasing educational materials, like, man, there's books like that out there. They're already out there. I don't even know if that book's still in print. I know the book was amazing. You know, I mean, it's, you know, a ton of fingerings for every scale, every mode. Like it's exactly how it was titled. Like that book was serious.
Yeah.
You know, would have you like write out your own ideas based on a mode or something. And so like it was also igniting a creative process with the information that was just communicated. And I'm man, there's so much there's so much in there. Like I feel like I can't compete. Like it's already on the market. It's how much research do you do kind of on a specific idea before you put together a book on the idea?
What research is as to whether it's worth doing? Or...
Well, I mean, I think it's always worth doing because it's your take on it and how you put the information together. But just knowing like what's out there on the topic of Geddy Lee bass lines or, you know, Michael Manring bass lines or something like that. I'm just using that as an example because of your Bass Monsters book.
I think the sort of slightly strange answer to that is I don't really care what's out there.
Yeah. Okay.
Because, first and foremost, I always said that whatever book I write for me.
Yeah.
And I said to someone the other day, if I was not so fortunate as to have music as a career, if I was just doing another job, I would still write the books that I write. It would take me longer, and I'd write them in the evenings, you know. But I'd still write them because they're for me primarily. And so I don't do any research into whether I think something is going to sell well, or you know, I don't really look at what's out there already, and you know, I don't look at and think, oh, there's loads of those books already, I'm not going to do one. I think, no, I want to do my version of that, you know. So
yeah.
But as it happens, you know, I've been writing books for 20 years, and certainly when I started doing it, there was nothing. In certain areas, I mean, you know, my book on tapping, which is one of the best-selling books I've had, there are no books on tapping out there. There's one that's been around since the 80s, and it's not bad by any stretch, but it's quite limited in its scope. You know, it only sort of covers a sort of relatively intermediate approach to the technique, and it's not always explained. I think it's a translation as well, so it's not always explained amazingly well through the translation.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do something that was much more of like, okay, so if you've never done any tapping before, how do you start? What are the questions? Being a teacher and being in a classroom with kids, sometimes I know that the first question is, but how do I do this? Where does my thumb go, and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
So I wanted something that would start from a beginner level, but go all the way through to the crazy stuff, but in one volume, if you see what I mean.
That's cool. That's cool. I like that. I like that approach a lot. I mean, the transcriptions I do end up picking for any specific collection are just that. Like, do I think this is hit? Like, yeah, I like this for, A, B, and C. Cool. I'm going to do that one.
Yeah.
Because, to circle back to session players, like they've done so much. It's like, well, and some of it, to use Pino again, so much great stuff. Like, he's played killing tracks on a Celine Dion record.
Yeah.
Now I don't necessarily want to transcribe Celine Dion's bass line. I do want to learn from Pino, though. Like, there's still so much in there, but I that's not that interesting to me. Versus, some of the other things he's done.
But there's probably a great series there, isn't there? Great bass lines in strange places. That kind of
Oh man, dude, that's your book right there. That's your book.
I know, that's your book.
Moving to the top of the list. All the songs that you don't think would have just a ridiculous bass track.
Yeah.
And then they're all just gonna be Pino.
They're all gonna be
Pino. Yeah, that's all it is. Cool, man. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And keep me posted on what's coming up, and I'll help you get word out about it for sure. I'm interested to see him.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ryan. Nice to talk to you.
All right, likewise, buddy. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right, that was my talk with Stuart Clayton. I liked what he had to say about really investing and encouraging students to find their place within the music industry. It's a big industry, and there's a lot of avenues for a lot of things. And I don't think that anybody should come at it with just this idea of it's all about being on the tour or being on the hit records or writing the hit records or whatever. Those are all super cool. But there's a lot of people in the world doing this, and there's only a few slots for those to happen. So really having a diverse skill set and being comfortable doing all the diverse things within the music industry, I think, is important, and really finding your place within it that keeps you excited about music. Because if you're excited about it, then hopefully that's going to come across into what you're doing. That excitement about how much you like whatever specific aspect you are in, that excitement's going to come across. And I think that's necessary, and hope everybody spends some time to really get into that idea for themselves and really find what excites them about music, so that when they are involved with it, that excitement comes through, and it comes through the music as well. So that's what I got on that. That's probably not all I got. I'm sure I got more, but I don't know. It seems like I'm done with the idea for right now. I'll be back with it for sure at some point. Yeah, folks, that's what I got for this one, and I will definitely catch you on the next one. Stay safe and stay healthy.